All right, everyone, get ready, because today we're diving headfirst into Shakespeare. Verona, Italy, love, tragedy, the whole shebang. We're talking Romeo and Juliet, folks. Got a whole stack of your sources right here, ready to unpack it all.
And centuries later, it's still a hit. It's amazing to me how this play still connects with people. I'm really curious to see what we find in your sources.
Me too. Everyone calls Romeo and Juliet the classic love story, righty?
Yeah.
But we're going deeper. Today, we're picking apart 5 of the most famous dialogues. We got to go past this star-crossed lovers thing and see why these lines are still famous today. Ready to get your Shakespeare on?
Let's do it.
All right, so Act 1, the Capulet Feast. We got tension, music, everyone's in those fancy masks. And then Romeo, he sees Juliet for the first time. But here's the thing. Their first words aren't your usual flirting. It's almost like religious or something.
It's true. Super bold, even for Shakespeare. Romeo, totally love-struck at first sight. He compares Juliet's hand to, get this, a holy shrine. Even talks about profaning it by touching it. Can you imagine someone using that line today?
See, you got to remember, back in Elizabethan England, religion was everything, not just a Sunday thing. So when Romeo uses that imagery, he's not just trying to be smooth, he's lifting their connection to, like, something sacred.
You got it. And Juliet, she's sharp as a tack, picks up on that religious metaphor right away, calls Romeo a pilgrim, shows off her quick wit, and lets him know she's noticed him.
Like they've got their own secret language from the get-go, full of hidden meanings and all that. And like you said, you can tell a lot about them from this playful back and forth. Romeo's head over heels, Juliet's playing it cool, but she's definitely interested.
Oh, and don't forget, this is all happening with their families at each other's throats. So their attraction is instant and strong, but also really dangerous. You can just feel that tension, that forbidden love, right from their first words.
Okay, so fast forward through some duels and drama. Now we've got moonlight, a balcony, and what might be the most famous scene ever. Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo?
And the genius of this scene, it's not just romantic stuff. Juliet's wrestling with a huge question. What's in a name? On the surface, she's wondering why Romeo has to be a Montague, the enemy. But there's something much deeper going on.
Yeah, it's bigger than just Romeo.
Yeah.
Back then, your family name was everything. Your social status, who you were loyal to, even your destiny. So when Juliet asks what's in a name, she's going up against the whole system.
That's a question we're still asking today. Why do we care so much about labels and categories? Can't love go beyond that? Plus, Juliet asking this adds that dramatic irony, you know?
For sure. We know Romeo's down there listening, but she has no clue. The ultimate eavesdropping. Makes the scene more intimate, but also hints at the huge problems they're going to face.
Because it's not just a neighborhood squabble between their families, it's life or death. And that brings us to their secret wedding, thanks to Friar Lawrence.
Friar Lawrence, the ultimate wingman, agrees to marry Romeo and Juliet in secret, hoping it'll fix things between the families. But even while he's doing the ceremony, he says this line that just gives me chills. These violent delights have violent ends.
Chills, right. Suddenly we're thinking about fate versus free will, which pops up throughout the play. Are Romeo and Juliet doomed from the start? Or do their choices seal their fate?
Exactly. Like Shakespeare's asking us, is it their love that's dangerous or the world they live in? The friar even compares love to fire and gunpowder. Not exactly what you want to hear at a wedding.
It's a powerful comparison because it shows how destructive passion can be if it's not controlled. Love, like fire, can be a good thing, but it can also burn you down.
And that destructive side, well, it gets real in the next scene. Romeo saying goodbye to Juliet after their wedding night. Talk about an emotional roller coaster.
Right. Bittersweet, heartbreaking, and you can cut the tension with a knife. Romeo has to run from Verona. He killed Tybalt, Juliet's cousin. Their goodbye is full of longing, bad feelings about the future, and this desperate need to pretend everything's okay.
Okay, hold up. Before we get to that goodbye, let's rewind for a sec. Some folks might be thinking, wait, Romeo killed Tybalt. I thought this was a love story. And it is. But Shakespeare's smart. He weaves action and violence into it to raise the stakes.
Exactly. It's not just love, it's about family, loyalty, and revenge gone wrong. Remember, this Montague-Capulet feud has been going on forever. It's messed everything up.
So Romeo killing Tybalt, it's not just some personal tragedy, it's a turning point. It sets off everything that takes them down.
You can feel that doom coming in their goodbye. Shakespeare uses light and darkness to show hope and despair.
Their time together is fading like the moonlight, and they're clinging to every second. Remember how they argue over a bird? Is it a nightingale or a morning lark singing?
They're literally arguing with time. Juliet wants Romeo to stay, so she insists it is not yet near day. But deep down, they both know it's almost over.
And that, my friends, is where we'll leave you for now. Make sure to catch part 2 of this deep dive, where we'll unpack the last 2 scenes and talk about why this play still matters today. You don't want to miss it. Welcome back, deep divers. Last time we left Romeo hightailing it out of Verona and Juliet, wishing for just a few more minutes together. Talk about leaving us hanging.
Shakespeare, the master of suspense, I tell you.
No kidding. And speaking of suspense, remember that line from Friar Lawrence? These violent delights have violent ends. It's like foreshadowing at its finest, dropping a truth bomb right in the middle of a wedding.
Totally. It reminds us that their happiness is built on secrets and breaking the rules. And we can't forget, this isn't just a love story, right? We've got 2 families who've been feuding for ages.
And Shakespeare never tells us why they're feuding in the first place. It's like this force of nature, always there in the background.
Right. It makes you wonder, are Romeo and Juliet really fighting against fate, or are they just caught in this cycle of violence they can't escape?
It's a question that hangs over the whole play. And that idea of fate versus free will,
Yeah.
it really comes to a head in those last tragic scenes.
Absolutely. But before we go down that road, remember you said their language was like a secret code?
Yeah.
That's what makes digging into Shakespeare so interesting.
Totally. It's like peeking into the past, seeing how people back then thought and felt, even if they didn't say it out loud.
Exactly. Like when Juliet's all, "What's in a name?" on the balcony. She's not just being difficult, she's struggling with those social rules. Why should your name matter so much, especially when it comes to love?
And what's crazy is that even though this play is, over 400 years old, that question still matters today. We still have labels, prejudice, this idea that our differences are bigger than everything else.
Exactly. And Shakespeare, through Juliet, is telling us to look past the surface, to see our shared humanity.
And he does it in those big dramatic moments and the smaller, quieter ones, like when Romeo has to leave Verona after,
Yeah.
and they're saying goodbye and they argue about what kind of bird they hear.
Oh, it's such a small thing, but it tells you everything about what they're feeling. They're holding on tight, trying to pretend time has stopped. Juliet's line, "It is not yet near day." It's heartbreaking and so relatable.
Isn't it? We've all been there. Denying reality, wishing for a few more minutes, a few more hours before things change forever.
Totally. And Shakespeare captures that feeling perfectly, that mix of hope and desperation, all in an argument about a bird.
Speaking of birds, remember how Romeo compares Juliet to a winged messenger of heaven? We've got bird imagery again, but this time it's not about time slipping away. It's about hope, becoming bigger than both of them.
And it's interesting how that imagery changes later. When Romeo sees Juliet in the tomb, he compares himself to a fly drawn to her beauty, even though she's,
It's like Shakespeare's always playing with our expectations, those familiar images, but used in surprising, sometimes even creepy ways.
That's what makes his work so timeless. It's full of layers, echoes, things that stay with you long after the play is over.
Speaking of over, I think it's time we talk about the elephant in the room. The reason Romeo and Juliet is still studied, performed, argued about, that tragic ending.
We can't do a deep dive on this play without talking about the heartbreak.
You're right, it's impossible.
No.
So for those who need a recap or maybe have miraculously avoided spoilers, here's the deal.
Romeo, thinking Juliet is dead, he takes his own life. And Juliet, when she wakes up and finds Romeo, she sees no other way out and does the same.
It's such a powerful moment of loss, not just for them, but for everyone watching or reading. We're rooting for these kids, hoping they'll find a way to be together. Then bam, it's ripped away.
That's Shakespeare for you. He takes us on this incredible journey, the highest highs of passion, then the lowest lows of grief. He doesn't shy away from the dark stuff, from the complicated truth about how we feel.
And even at the very end, you get this feeling that it had to happen this way, like it was fate. Remember the chorus at the beginning? A pair of star-crossed lovers take their life. Shakespeare is telling us right then and there, this isn't going to end well.
Right. But even knowing that, it doesn't make it any easier to handle. And that's what makes their story so tragic, even now. Sometimes love isn't enough to overcome everything life throws at you.
And sometimes, even the best intentions, the choices we make, they could have consequences we never imagined. Terrible consequences.
You got it. But there's still a little bit of hope in all the sadness. Remember, when Romeo and Juliet die, it finally makes their families wake up. They realize what their feud has done. They finally reconcile. It's ironic, but it takes their deaths for love to win out.
Bittersweet ending, for sure. But it shows how powerful this play is. It makes us think about love, loss, what it means to experience tragedy.
And that's the perfect place to transition into our final thoughts on Romeo and Juliet. But first, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back to talk about why this play is still so important and what it can still teach us.
And we're back to Romeo and Juliet. Before the break, we were talking about how their love story ends so tragically, but still gives a little spark of hope.
It's true, their deaths made the Montagues and Capulets finally see what their stupid feud had done. It took that much for them to make peace.
Makes you wonder, though, could they have avoided it all if they just understood each other better, communicated more?
That's the big question, isn't it? And it's why this play still matters to us. Hundreds of years later, we're still dealing with the same stuff. Prejudice, hatred, keeping quiet when we should speak up.
Shakespeare's holding up a mirror to us, isn't he? Making us look at the ugly parts of ourselves.
And he does it in a way that never gets old, but also feels so real. I mean, these characters talking in poetry with swords and stuff, but they feel like real people. The way they're happy and sad and struggling, it all just clicks with us deep down.
So true. Haven't we all felt that first love thing, or dealt with family drama, or freaked out over a big decision?
Exactly. Those are human things everyone gets, and that's why we keep coming back to Romeo and Juliet, reading it for class, seeing it on stage, even those movie versions.
Speaking of which, it's wild how many times this play has been remade. West Side Story, Romeo and Juliet. Everyone's got their own Romeo and Juliet.
It's cool how each version shows you something about the time it was made. Like West Side Story used it to talk about race problems in 1950s New York.
It's kind of mind-blowing.
Yeah.
A play from the 1500s still talking to us about today's problems.
That's what great stories do, right? Some things never change. Love loss, fate, free will. Those themes are universal.
You said it. But for me, what makes Romeo and Juliet so special is how it's written. Shakespeare's words, the way he uses images and metaphors, it's amazing.
He was so good at capturing every human emotion with such beauty and precision. Like when Juliet says, "My bounty is as boundless as the sea, my love is deep." Simple but so powerful, you really feel how much she loves Romeo.
And it's not just the lovey-dovey parts. Even when it's tragic, Shakespeare throws in humor, wit, of those little moments of wisdom.
You know that part where Mercutio talks about Queen Mab? Funny, weird, a little creepy, but it's so Mercutio. He's playful, but he knows bad things are coming.
Exactly. Shakespeare's always reminding us that life is messy, good and bad joy and pain. That's what makes his work so interesting.
Complex, challenging, full of contradictions, just like real life.
So as we wrap up our Romeo and Juliet deep dive, here's our takeaway. Don't just read the spark notes. Go read the real deal. Get lost in those words, the drama, that timeless love story.
Because even now, Romeo and Juliet still has things to teach us about who we are, the world we live in, and how powerful love loss and the human spirit really are.
Perfectly said. And on that note, we'll say goodbye for now. Thanks for joining our Shakespeare deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep those questions coming, and keep the conversation going.